I used some of this, the titanium Rust-Oleum Universal Metallic Paint and Primer in one, any surface, any angle, wood, metal, plastic, masonry, titanium, silver, and I taped off the bottom bit and used some cardboard, and looks pretty good. So far so good. Sprayed up in the T-slots as well, and I was able to use a punch to put down in the hole for where the handle's supposed to go, and raised that and lowered that, and there was a bunch of gunk up underneath where the table had been sitting. So, and then I figured, okay, well maybe I will try moving this thing. So I loosened those, and it was jammed solid, and you can see there's a bunch of gunk up in there as well. So basically what that means is I'm probably not going to take the pipe out of the base, because that goes down in about this far, and if that's over 100 pounds, that's going to be a pain in the butt to get up out. But since there was gunk underneath the table where the table was sitting, and there was gunk under this where that was sitting, I pretty much need to, I'm fairly certain there's gunk under there and in between all the bits. And if I'm going to paint this, I have to get up underneath, and yes, that paint says it will do upside down, but I really don't want to paint upside down. I'd rather flip the table over and paint from the bottom. That's going to mean, yeah, working to take all this fun stuff off and do a good cleaning, because this part of the pipe is nice and clean where they'd used a Scotch-Brite pad and other stuff to go over it good. But where the table was sitting, you can still see there's some discolored bits. I do still have to take all this off. And if I'm going to take all that off, that means that before I put all this, if I'm doing all that, I should paint all this before it goes on as well, while I can still move it around. And I'm still not sure if I'm going to take the bearings out of the inside. It sounded okay when I turned it on and off, but I still might do it just so that's done and dealt with, and I can be sure that everything's good. Since I'm going to have to take this all apart and clean it and degrease it and such in order to paint it, because this is caked on grease and such, and I suspect there's more up and around in there. So since I'm going to have to do that, it's easiest if it's just the metal casting. Plus, I had wanted to double check these bearings up here in any case. I loosened up this set screw, and then there's a set screw on each side here. And then I put a piece of plywood up in. I should have used solid wood because it made all sorts of little splinters that I'm now going to get to clean out of there. Extra fun. But in any case, I was able to tap it up. It came up out. So yeah. So now I just have to get all these pieces up out. But yeah, there's grit and grime and stuff up in there, so I'm going to take this out, get these pieces out, look, check them out. And if the bearings are still good, I can put them back in. If they look questionable or need repacked with grease, I can repack them with grease. Because one thing I did notice whenever I was researching is these may be custom bearings, meaning they may not be standard at all. Well, standard for this, but because of when it was created in the late 40s and such, or depending on when in the 40s it was made, there may have been custom stuff used, because that's what was available. And plus, this way I will know more what the pieces and stuff are up in here, versus just having it as a black box and then always wondering, okay, should I have changed that? Should I have cleaned that? Should I have done something? This way I'll have gone through it and I will know what's in there. Okay, well, good news is the bottom bearing looks to be a sealed bearing. I don't know if that's a replacement or what. That's what the top looks like. That goes up to the oil fitting at the very top. Unfortunately, the bearing on the top of the pulley is an open bearing, and it looks to be very messy in there. I don't have my light over here, but yeah, so I definitely got to clean that one out and re-grease it. That one I'm just going to try and wipe and clean up, and hopefully that one can go back in. But that one definitely needs cleaned up and re-greased. So we are going to try that. I did manage to get that much cleaner. So I was able to clean all that off and a lot of the grease that was in there out. So that was worth taking off. And just the fact that Knowing that that bearing right there is like that, yeah, I need to deal with that. The bottom bearing cleaned up pretty good, and it says SKF on it. There's no numbers on this side. It's probably on the back. This part, which the top bearing fits into, cleaned up decently well. I'll have to hit it with a little bit of 600 grit, and maybe a file to take any of these edges off for where the set screws. It's obviously gone in a couple times because there's set screw marks multiple places, but that came out pretty good. This part, well, I managed to tap such that I got the bearing loose, and I managed to clean it up such that I can read SKF, I think it says I-70382A on that inner ring. The worst part, I don't know if I can get that to balance, it does not spin very well. Like, it's gritty and you can feel that it's not spinning correctly. So I'm glad I took that off. Tried to clean it out with some brake cleaner and stuff, and it just doesn't want to clean up. Now maybe if I packed it full of grease, I could get it to run somewhat smooth, but my impression on bearings is if they don't run smooth dry, they're not going to run properly smooth. And this, yeah, I got to try and get, well, one, I got to try and get that one off. As you see, I managed to get it such that it's up. I got to get a bearing puller and deal with that. But at least I was able to get the I-70382A SKF. So hopefully that's something I can look up online, and hopefully that's something I can just order. That would be nice. And ideally, I'm going to try and get a sealed bearing this time instead of an open one. So I got the bearing off on the top. The open part was facing up. Yeah, it makes, it's gritty and makes noise. So I definitely need to try and get that fixed. So this one, when I got the shaft up out of the pulley, the bearing was at the top. This key was just inside that to lock the shaft into the pulley. And then measuring the shaft, it's a 1-inch shaft, so that's this inside diameter. And the outside is pretty close, 52 millimeters. Yeah, it's basically 51 something, 52 millimeters. Hopefully if I order something that's 52 millimeters, 51.99, 52. So hopefully that will work. Yeah, I just got to find something that has a 1-inch interior and 52 millimeter outside. But this one was spinning nicely and was not grinding and making noise, probably because this is sealed on the top and it may or may not be open on the bottom. So any grit that came from the top down when it was cleaned and oiled in the past, the grit would have went past the bearing versus getting stuck inside. Whereas the top bearing was open on the top, and here's the piece that was on the bottom of the pulley. This side was pointing leave outward, and that side was, which has the weird little circle bits. Don't know why. Probably just in the grease. I ain't fully cleaned this one yet. That was facing the pulley. So yeah, and that, looking at this part in here, it definitely cleaned up pretty good. So you can see that it's the pink color versus grease color now. So that'll be nice. And there is rust up in here a little bit. That's probably why that was a pain to take up off the shaft. There was just enough rust to conflict with the shaft. So I'll make sure to sand that out before I put it back on. But good news is this part is, I think, pretty close ready to paint. I just have to mask it all off. And yay for neighbors who do car work and have tools. So with a little pulley remover, my neighbor Robert helped pull this up out. I was right, this was an open bearing, it's just this time the bottom, or the open part was facing down. But you can see how much gunk was up in there. So I got 2 bearings to replace it, so hopefully I'm going to measure it after this, but after I clean it up, because I don't want to get that all over my measuring tool. But I think it's the same size, so that should be good. And Robert was also able to help lift the table off. So yay! That doesn't look too horrible, I think. I haven't looked down in here yet, so let's see. Oh yeah, there is some accumulated gunk that managed to make its way down in there. Not horrid, but enough that should probably get cleaned out. So, yeah. And now that this table is off and in the light, you can see the extra grit. So, now that the table's off, I can clean the rest of this and get this part all ready for paint. So this is the bearing section that the table sits on, and the gear that the flat gear that the table rides on is supposed to go here. And there's 2 screws or whatnot that go in from the sides, on this side and on this side. And then I take it apart and oh look, that's exciting. There's just balls. So yeah, I have to clean this, get it all cleaned up, and not lose any of those, because that would suck. But you can see the gunky grease, the old stuff that I got to get out. So I will get that cleaned up. This is the one part I couldn't initially get off. This is supposed to go on there, and that is the table adjustment, the height adjustment piece. And the reason I wanted to get it off is you can see all the chips and stuff down in here that I was not able to get out from either the top or the bottom easily. And you can also see the really old grease now that is clogging everything up. We are going to clean that all up, because that's the one part that I was not able to get into before, and I just needed to use this. It was initially stuck because of these pegs and the old grease. It didn't want to move. Yeah, that is totally caked with old grease and gunk and chips and things. So, yeah. Gotta get all that cleaned out. That is a lot of grease. But I got the gears and everything all cleaned up and ready to put back together, so the reason I kept that out is that way I know approximately how much to put back in, or maybe not quite that much, but just get a good bit amount up in. So now I got to get these back in the way they're supposed to go. Luckily, I don't know if that shows up, but that's a parts diagram, so I know the proper way that those are supposed to go back in. Yay, it is back together. The secret was, well, a couple things. One, the little indexing pin, basically these gears and the indexing pin need to be put in first. This part needs to be pulled out like I had it when I had it all apart. And then you need to push the shaft in, and then once the shaft is in, you can tap this back and that goes in place. The other thing I noticed is these have set screws to hold on to that little indexing pin. However, they were not tight. It just slid right out. The shaft just slid right out. So whenever the last person was in here, did their work, they didn't put that back. Probably because there was grease all over it and they couldn't find them, is my guess. But I'm not 100% sure. But in any case, the next part is getting it back on the machine. And to do that, there's these little indexing pins on the face of there. So then first you have to loosen these up so that you do have a little bit of side-to-side motion so that it will fit in and you can get the indexing pins in. And then once that's sorted, you can tighten these up because this will be lined up. And then my plan is to take this back off and put grease in all these and run it good and then stick it on for good. So we'll see how that works. But the good news is my dad helped me get the grease gun I have working, so I can actually apply grease like a normal person instead of with the finger and a bunch of goop. It's back on. I'm not 100% sure it's adjusted right, because that index pin from here stayed in the main casting. The index pin on the bottom came out into this part, so it may be slightly shifted. I'm not 100% sure. I will have to play with that. And this is a little bit hard to turn, but I'm not using the actual, I'm not using the actual handle because that was just painted. So it was always hard to turn with the screwdriver. So maybe it'll be okay. The big issue is when this turns, it moves in the gear on the inside, and it either moves inward and then hits the main casting, or backwards and hits the back of the inside piece there. And when it does that, it gets hard to turn, and then you just keep rotating and it does its thing. Because there's a little ball there, you can kind of see that. This phone does not do zoomed in very well. So I suspect that's a way to either oil or grease in there, or grease up in here. I'm obviously going to have to repaint this because it got all messed up when I was using the brake cleaner to clean all the inside out. But good news is, none of that stuff, and there's quite a bit of metal shavings in that, none of that stuff is still in there. I didn't put quite that much grease, but I put a good bit. But yeah, you can see, like those are big metal shavings that were in there. So, yeah, it's good that that's not in there anymore. Yay for putting things back together. So, get the plate put back on. I got most of the tape taken off, and I actually managed to get this back in. So what I did was, there was the cup at the bottom. That's the Permatex medium strength thread locker blue. Since the bearing was spinning more or less in the cup, I put that around the outside of the bearing. So when it seated into the cup, there was a layer of that between the outside of the bearing and the cup. Then similarly at the top, I put a layer of that around the outside of the cup, and then put the bearing in to make sure it had thread locker between it. And I realize you're supposed to use stuff for like bearing surfaces versus threads, but I don't have that one. So we're going to try this, because it didn't have that before. It just had gunk clogging it up. So I'm hoping this works slightly nicer than gunk. Then I had this level with the first I made sure with both bearings that the shaft was in the correct position inside here, and that bottom spacer block had just enough space for the bearing, and so it was all properly lined up. Then I put the bottom and top bearings in the system, or in the main frame here. Then this part with the shaft fit right in, and before I put that down in the bearing, I put the thread locker around the shaft, stuck that down in the bottom bearing, and then I also put thread locker around the top of the shaft before I put the whole thing in there, because otherwise I can't get in there easily. So thread locker on both sides of the shaft. Then I gently pushed this down, and it was about this far to start whenever we started all this. So it does not move up and down, and it spins nicely. Those are two good things with bearings. So then I turned these set screws in. I turned the set screw on here, and now I can turn the set screw on here, and then this piece will be done, and I can start working on some other part. I also put the motor pieces back together, since I had taken this off to paint the cord and box. So that's ready to go. That's ready to go back on here, which is ready to go. I have all the bolts and stuff there for that. Yeah, it should be good. And let's see, where is it? This part is the fixed turn arm, and you can see at the bottom where it was welded, but that's going to work great. So that's good. All the little pieces are cleaned up on the inside, because this is the part that goes down over the big post that the headpiece sits on. So this actually fits right here, holding on the shaft, keeping it up in case you loosen the head bolt so you can rotate it. This ring prevents that from falling. So I got the handle back on with the pin, and the one thing I learned is it definitely does matter which way or which orientation the center shaft is as compared to the outer shaft. Meaning, when they drilled this, they had this in place and they drilled down through, and it is not the same if the center shaft is facing this direction or if the center shaft is facing that direction. If, for example, the center shaft was facing in this orientation, meaning this side of it up, and I had the handle in that orientation, the pin would not go through the whole way through. But if I have the center shaft rotated 180 degrees in this orientation. Then the holes line up in the outside of here, through the inner shaft, and out the other side. There. That was fun, especially because initially there was either corrosion or just old on-off gouges, grooves, etc. in this cast iron piece, and I managed to tap it on in the wrong orientation, and then I realized, oh, that's not right, and then I had a really hard time getting it back off, and I didn't want to just smack it because I didn't want to break it again. Yeah, I finally got it back off, figured out that you have to go one direction, and then using some needle files and some 400 grit sandpaper and even an actual rougher file, I was able to file not only the inside of this handle but also the end of the shaft as well, because that may also have been ballooned up a little bit. So I filed that off, filed the inside and sanded that good with 400 grit, sanded the shaft, used a little bit of this, and then I got it back on in the correct orientation, and it turns very easily, at least for that far. So hopefully that will work. Thanks to Robert, table is on, top part is on, motor and even belt are on, and it works. So Robert got to see that it was working. My next challenge was putting this spring assembly on. I needed a 1032 screw and just a little over a 1/4 inch long. Luckily I did have a 1032 that was, I think, an inch, so I cut most of it off, maybe 3/8, somewhere in there. But anyway, it was a short one. That is now on, so yay, that part is the spring assembly that goes with the quill. So now I can keep putting things together. There was one part I forgot to take apart. This part. This went in there because that's what the height gauge rides on. And this really cruddy mess went in this side, although with that, the flat part was facing back, because that is how you tighten and lock the quill height. However, when I tried to put the quill in, it's getting jammed. And that was because somehow during all the mess we were doing, this thing got rotated slightly, so it was impacting and sliding on the quill. So I couldn't get it turned, so I had to take it all out. So now I'm going to clean all in here, clean this all up so it's more of a shiny thing, lube it up in there with fresh grease, and yeah. Then try again. I am slowly running out of stuff to take apart. I'm not 100% sure at this point what else could possibly be taken apart, because this part I've had back in, had to take back out. That's the height adjustment knob. This is the only piece I think that I haven't taken apart. So I'm taking this apart. We will clean it. We will see if it goes in easier. Hopefully it will. It's all together. Finally. It's on its stand. Pulling on it, stand stays put. My new mag switch drill press fence, which is what's supposed to go on this one, works. The handles all work. This is the table locking, that's the height adjuster, so you loosen this one up and then that cranks it up and down. It's all nice and shiny. I got the height piece installed, so will go down and should go right back up. This is all tightened so it doesn't rotate. This is all tightened so the belts are attached. I may have to make it a little tighter, but we'll test it first. Switch is all hooked up. One thing I probably have to do is I think I have to get a longer cover cable, because it's just at the end and it's old, so it's split along the back side there. But as long as I don't move it, it's probably okay. But if I ever have to tighten the belt anymore, it's pretty much just I think we have maybe a 1/2 inch, but then that's just taut, so that's probably not ideal. But yeah, this This part all works. I got this installed. I got this cleaned out. It works so much better with it cleaned out. This actually will lock or unlock as it's supposed to. All right, it's plugged in. Let's see if it blows up. It shouldn't. It should just start. And it starts. All right, hold that thought. I can't do this with one hand and hold the board, so I'll be right back. Much better. Now this is on there solid. It should drill right down in. Let's see if it works. It turns on. This will be the true test to see if it's spinning the correct direction. That looks like it's spinning the correct direction. And it looks like it drills no problem. So, yay, I have a second working drill press. That is awesome. I can just barely back up enough to get it all in frame. So the only thing that I didn't do that I'm going to do later is I think I'm going to make, some of them have a belt shroud that matches this shape. So I don't know if I'll do a right at the very next project, but I think that might be what this is for. Let's see, is there one on the other side like that? No. Yeah, so here and here, a lot of them are clamshell style. So one half is static, and then the other half is on hinges and lifts up. So I think this is the side that's static, and these are the holes to attach the cover, and then the other side is just on hinges that lifts up out of the way if you need to change the belt tension or sizing or speed or any of those bits. This is awesome. It looks great in the silver and it works. And I did, after having cleaned this out, I've cleaned everything out except for inside the quill, and that didn't need redone. And then I have the drift pin to go in here to knock the chuck out, because this is one of those tapered chucks. So in order to switch that, you put the drift pin in and tap it, and that knocks it down. Obviously, you want to have a board or something there to catch it, so you don't want to mess it up. Yeah, this is awesome. It works. I finally got it finished.